Well, happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody, and welcome to yet another Ball Publishing webinar. I am Chris Beatties, editor of Grower Talks and Green Profit magazines and the e-newsletter Acres Online, and I will be your host for the next hour or so as we tackle today's topic: control your growing environment, control your costs. I believe this is the fifth webinar that I've done with our sponsor today and our guest experts today, Argus. They know a lot about getting everything there is about out of your environmental controls. They make some very good ones. In fact, you can find those other webinars at the same place where you sign up at the at growertalks.com/webinars under the Available Now section. I'll give you that URL in a second. Now, in those previous webinars, I think I've probably mentioned my former Florida greenhouse, which was equipped with the very latest in Dayton two-stage thermostats to control the fans, pads, and heaters. They worked, and that was about all you can say about it. But thankfully, that was all you needed in the 80s. They didn't help me save money on electricity or propane. They certainly had nothing to do with sustainability, which we didn't even know about back then. But today, it's a big deal, which is why we are here. We're going to dive into how you can utilize environmental controls to reduce costs of electricity, of fuel, water, fertilizer, maybe even more. And even more interestingly, I think we're going to go beyond that to the value that this can bring to your customers and the end consumer. You just have to talk about that with them. Now, to help me do that, I've got not one but two experts on the line. The first is Mr. Dirk Sprangers, a technical sales manager for Argus. Welcome, Dirk.
Morning, Chris.
Good morning. Good morning,
Yep.
Dirk. Now I note the address, the accent, the address. What address are you accenting from, Dirk?
The accent is Dutch. I'm from the northern part of Belgium, so it's Dutch.
Yeah, but where are you?
I actually live in. So I'm broadcasting from Brisbane, Australia.
And the fascinating thing is, you're doing this webinar tomorrow.
It's correct. I live in the future.
Right. He lives in the future. It is the 6th of May. We weren't quite clear on that because he tuned in 24 hours ago to work this webinar, and I had to tell him he was so anxious to get going. But Dirk, what do you do for Argus?
Technical sales. I look after the technical aspects in Southeast Asia, and I assist Europe as well.
All right, beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful. Well, we're glad to have you here. You're going to be our leadoff man today. Helping Dirk today, or tomorrow, whenever the heck it is, we have a grower of indoor lettuce and cannabis. And he's going to add not only some practical knowledge, he's really going to take it into that what does it mean to the consumer realm. So it's not just, hey, saving money is awesome, but you can do so much more with this. And he is Mr. Shawn Cooney. Welcome, Shawn.
Good afternoon, Chris.
Yeah, see, you're in Boston, Mass, right?
I sure am.
All right, where it is afternoon. I'm right in Chicagoland myself, broadcasting high atop the Ball Publishing broadcast studios, where it's just noon 03. But you have a growing business that's behind you, right? Tell us about those cargo shipping containers, which are very valuable, by the way, today.
Yeah, I should resell them. They're shipping container farms, complete controlled environment agriculture, and in a box. Water, lights, plants, and we turn out our lettuce in 3 weeks.
That's beautiful. But you're also the founder, is that correct, of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition?
Yep.
Tell us what that is.
It's a group of interesting industry folks that have decided that the industry needs people to get out in front and start talking about the benefits of sustainability, as opposed to ducking it as a subject that we don't want to talk about because we use a lot of electricity. So it's a bunch of thought leaders in the industry, and Argus is one of our founding members.
And I think, it's important for our audience to know that while it may be the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition, these principles apply to everybody. certainly any CEA grower, controlled environment agriculture, whether you're growing petunias or peppers or cannabis. Or anything in between. So that's why we've got you here. So welcome aboard. We appreciate that. It's going to be a fascinating hour or so. Let me do just a tiny bit of housekeeping here. First of all, the first question I always get is, no, the second question I always get is, how do I ask questions? You use the Q&A tool. Don't go away, Shawn. You can stay on. You use the Q&A tool that's somewhere on your dashboard. Type them in. I'll get to them as we go along. Probably save them for the end of the presentation, unless it's something so compelling and I say, wow, that is an awesome question. Why didn't I think of that? And then I'll interrupt Dirk or Shawn and say, guys, tell us what this is all about. The first question I always get, though, that's where I was going, is will this webinar be archived? Because I have to leave early, or I want to share it with a colleague. Always at growertalks.com/webinars, the same place you signed up, conveniently enough. And it's also the same place you can watch all of our other pre-recorded webinars, like the other ones that we've done with Argus. So I believe that is, yes, that's an empty slide. So that means that's the end of my housekeeping. Dirk, it's going to be your turn now. Go ahead and share your screen. Shawn and I will hide and mute ourselves to avoid any distractions. And you can take it away.
Yeah, the cost savings for most growers sit in those three items, being energy, water, and fertilizer, and labor. And in this webinar, I'll just touch on 1 and 2. Point number 3 can be automated as well. Probably needs a separate webinar to talk about, because it is possible with that as well. With our environmental controls, or climate controllers, as we call them, you can only control what's being installed from machinery. So you can only operate that type of equipment, and that needs to be calculated and designed correctly. For example, if we have to control dehumidifiers and humidity has to drop to, let's say, below 65%, and dehumidifier is on for 100% all the time, and it doesn't go below the 75 or 65%, usually means that the dehumidifier is not calculated correctly. And as a control system, we can only call for that machine to come on. So it is crucial that that design of the facility is done correctly. That's part of my job within Argus Controls. I look after our resellers and our customers, making sure that if they ask us to control something, that I can guarantee that it's going to work, basically. Next slide is return. We talk about return of investment. The thing to point out here is probably the 74% reduce of overall expenses by controlling your environment correctly, and then 100% improved control of the greenhouse. The next one shows that the investment in a environmental control system or a climate controller is actually a small cost compared to some other ones, while the saving is or can be relatively large. There are a few things here. We talk about, it relates back to the first slide, actually, that we have to control the right equipment and the right solutions. With that comes into play your geographical location. There's no point, for example, in buying, for example, patent fan system in a humid area, trying to control your cooling. In those particular situations, you would have to go to, for example, mechanical cooling. Both systems can be, of course, controlled. Both systems require its own typical control system. But next to choosing the right equipment within the facility, it also needs to be the right equipment for the crop, the right equipment for your geographical location. Controller capabilities. So we can actually, with the control systems, we can control all kinds of things from temperatures, humidity, soil moisture, with nutrient concentrations. With that, we can actually control, measure it in the water, we can measure in the plant, we can measure what comes out of the plant. Our control systems allow for predictive energy balance calculations. Predictive energy balance calculations make sure that you actually get the most out of your heating and cooling systems. An example could be, we can measure the sun coming up by measuring radiation, and depending on the rise in radiation, we can predict a rise in temperature, which then with our control systems, we can actually make sure that the heating starts to dial down before the temperature rise is being measured. And with doing that, your heating graph will more flatline compared to your on-off control. Which is what we talk about here, actually pulse width modulation, on-off compared to analog control is what we call it. Heat buffering systems management and cogeneration. That's a very interesting topic as well, actually. We can control both of them. Usually both of them are linked. With cogen, you generate your own electricity, heat, CO2. The byproduct of that is heat, which is stored in a buffer. And heat can then be released in the evening or at night, whilst the cogen might run during the day when you want the energy and especially the CO2. So all of that can be controlled as well. Those things quite often require to be controlled by periods in the day. 4 or 5 periods in the day is what's commonly used. Energy source relocation. So with a heat buffer, you can have a cogen. You can have also 1 or 2 boilers on top of it, depending on what kind of fuel there is available. We can control the entire energy system then, depending on costs. That can be during multi-day temperature averaging as well. So to get the best control, a lot of growers look at an average temperature during the day, so that's if there's a hot day or a cold day in a week, the system can counteract for that. Of course, we can control natural and supplemental lighting. The control of natural lighting would be through, for example, a shade screen. Supplemental light can be HPS or LEDs. A couple of tips that we always talk about is with growers is don't just turn the heat down. We've seen growers do this. Crops will survive. You don't get the most out of it. In saying that, I usually encourage growers to play with that 24-hour average a little bit. If you can drop it by ½ degree, crop might not even notice it, depending on the stage the crop is at, and it can actually save quite a bit of energy. Second is make sure that all the equipment is operating normally. It goes back to the very first bit again, basically, that we can only control the equipment and it needs to be designed correctly, but also it needs to be maintained correctly. So the equipment have filters in it. If airflow is not correct, then you might not get the required result. Number 3, sensors. Of course, they need to work properly. They need to be calibrated, so it doesn't need a maintenance. If there is a layer of dust on a temperature sensor, if it gets wet, your temperature measured is completely off, and then your entire controls are off. The controller might think the whole greenhouse is too cool while it's actually not. heating comes on, etc. So sensors need to be calibrated. It's very important. Number 4 is if you want to, for example, when I gave the example about dropping the 24 average temperature, it is very important that you actually record and look at all the data before you start doing it, while you're doing it, so that you can actually draw a conclusion out of it as well. With set points, number 5 set points, you can actually provide very smooth control. Especially when you use your periods in the day. You can use periods for ramping up and ramping down as well. The smoother it is, the less climate stress you put on the plant, and the more control you got over your humidity. CO2, if you do have CO2 available, there's many crops that benefit out of it hugely, actually. It needs a specific type of control. It depends on if you use liquid CO2 or hot CO2. Hot CO2 requires very specific control, not so much because of the CO2, but how it's generated. Again, number 7, there you go. So it's linked to quite often to a heat storage system and heat generation as well, which can be very, very complex, and you need proper control to get the most out of that. Plant-centric controllers, or plant-centric environmental controllers, where's the future? I'll talk a little bit about this. Machine learning is something that most of us are working on. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, all the data that comes in, controllers can learn from that, can learn how plants behave, and make adjustments based on the program. Usually, whatever is operational now has a lot of override settings, of course, and still needs to be monitored by growers. With control systems, you can control your climate, you can get the most out of the climate, but irrigation and fertigation needs a topic as well. There can be a lot of savings in water and fertilizers. Fertilizers is a huge cost. Water depends on what kind of water you've got available, and I think local laws. I know in Europe, where I'm from, people have to or start paying for rainwater as well, and on wastewater. But to get the most out of your water, you have to make sure you control, the proper elements like crop monitoring, the irrigation scheduling, your nutrients and your pH, delivery and distribution, recovery and recycling. So recovery and recycling is part of called the closed loop watering, which is systems where the drain water is recollected, treated, or filtered, treated, and then reused into the irrigation. Your fresh water can come from all kinds of sources: town water, bore water, rainwater. If town water is still part of your equation here, or from the operation, it's usually quite costly to use or to run. Sometimes there is no other option. So having a closed loop irrigation then becomes almost critical to run a sustainable operation. But depending on the water, you might need filtration or treatment. So town water, sometimes in certain areas, I've seen it before, calcium levels can be way too high. Bore water, quite often you've got ECs or ECs that are way too high as well. That then needs RO treatments. Rainwater is usually the best type of water to use, depending on how it's captured, etc. Growers choose or not to actually disinfect rainwater. Irrigation and fertigation. There's all kinds of solutions, but the thing that you should not ever forget is make sure that the pH is correct. Depending on the pH, a plant can only take up X amount of nutrients. But to control your pH correctly, the water needs to be buffered. Especially when you use reverse osmosis, it usually strips the water clean, and then you've got you can get huge pH swings once you start dosing. In those cases, it's actually crucial then for proper control that the water is pre-buffered. So a pre-buffer system can look like on the picture. But a lot of RO systems these days actually have a pH or an acid dosing on the system itself, which then can buffer the water while it goes through the system from one tank into another tank. After the pre-blending, or if you use pre-blending, once the water is buffered with acid, and you've got a stable pH, you can actually dose your fertilizers depending on almost whatever you like, basically. So you can do single element dosing, or you can do your AB mix dosing. Within controls, within automated controls, you can program recipes, which is usually based on a calculation of proportional dosing. And then with sensors, you do basically, the control system does a check and a measure. Yeah. What else we got? Crop monitoring. There's all kinds of systems available. All kinds of systems available. With Argus, we have our own weight scale system where we can measure the weight of individual plants. We can integrate third-party sensors or sensor setups to do the same thing. The thing with scales is usually the trick there is to use that to wake up the plant in the morning, as we call it, after a dryback period overnight. You want to make sure that the plant has enough water, but you don't want to soak it. You don't want the medium to overflow, basically. Then during the day, we can measure and control. I think it's called leachate in English in America. We can control that. We can control the moisture and the EC levels within the crop as well. To get the most out of it. When you do that, you kind of prevent over fertilizing. And then if you do over fertilize, or you happen to do so in the later afternoon, then you have to start flushing the media so that the root zone doesn't get too salty. So once you measure all of that, you can control that better, and there is less waste to produce. In the closed loop system, you capture that leachate. Of course, you measure it. The data used out of that measurement is used to actually fine-tune your irrigation, but it's also used then to treat it. Treating can be disinfection by heat. It can be disinfection by adding chlorine to it sometimes. It can be UV system. So this is a UV system on the example. Once it's treated, it can be reused and then injected or blended into the closed loop system just before the fertigation. And if you do so, you can actually relatively easily save up to 30% of your fertilizer, which is quite handy. And here's just a couple of examples of how that would be integrated. So these here on the purple bit, that's your fertilizer injection. This is your treatment, and these are your freshwater tanks and your treated reused water tanks, and it gets blended in. Depending on the crop, depending on the growing system, growing media with the growing system, it might need a completely different setup. So this is a little setup with batch tanks or day tanks, where the blending sits here before the treatment, and then it goes into a pre-tank, gets topped up, etc. So yeah, that's it, Chris.
Go ahead and stop your screen share there, Dirk. Come back to the full image. Thanks very much. Can you find the right? There it is. All right. No questions. Well, there's one question that came in, except I'm not sure if you can answer it because it involves geothermal in Chicagoland, where I am. It's slightly off topic, although I'm
Yeah.
sure if you've got a geothermal heating and or cooling system, you would definitely want a high-end environmental control to tie into that to control it. Correct?
Yes. So there is there is integration, absolutely.
Is it used at all in
Geothermal-
Australia? I know it's used a lot in the
Not in
Netherlands.
Australia. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I actually was still in Europe when they started using it in Europe. And at the time it was difficult, I remember, for the guys that were trying to set it up to make it economical because of the cost involved in the initial setup.
Installation.
From a
Yeah.
controls perspective, it's actually not that big of a deal, to be honest. It's not too difficult.
Yeah, well, I tell you, Scott asked the question. Scott, since I'm in Chicagoland, I know a little bit. There was an operation called Elzinga and Huxema that about 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, quite a while back, put in the first and only geothermal system that I know of. This was in southern Michigan. And the business closed shortly after that. I don't believe it was because of the the geothermal, but they ran a series of pipes and tubes straight down into the ground through about a couple of hundred different shafts, down and up and down and up, trying to grab that latent heat. My answer would be, though, because I don't know of any viable. You asked about viable geothermal heating options in the Midwest. There probably really aren't any viable ones. I think you've got to go up to someplace like North Dakota or Idaho where there are hot springs and hot geothermal to start to capture it. So, and we've got a question from Richard. When moving to more advanced automated control solutions like Argus, say you're using a high-end step controller or something like that, a good system but not fully automated. What kind of cost savings can I expect, and in what areas of the greenhouse? Just in a nutshell, percentage-wise, I guess.
Yeah, in which areas? It's actually kind of in almost any area. The biggest difference sits in a step controller will turn something on or off, and it might be either doing it too late or too early. With a more advanced system, you just fine tune it and you use your energy more efficient. Your cost savings, it's hard to tell, but you can easily save 10 to 20%, I reckon.
All right. How do you know when it's time to move up from a step controller type of system to a fully integrated system?
Well, that's a good question. It's usually related to budget available.
Yeah, because certainly they allow you to do a lot more things. So I guess if you're looking around the greenhouse and you've got how about square footage? A lot of people just think about size. How many square feet do you need to
size?
that?
Size is actually not so relevant. It's more about how much equipment needs to be controlled. That would probably be a better indicator, actually. So the more stuff you need to control, the more energy saving or the more savings you can actually have by controlling it properly. So if you just have a heater that needs to be turned on or off, you can do that yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's 5 different ones you can use a step controller. But if you have heating, cooling, screens, etc., and if the volume of equipment becomes larger, then it would be probably
sure. And a lot of people are getting that way. Got to put in 2 layers of screens now, all sorts of things like that. Let's see. Edgardo is asking, what type of heat storage is Argus able to work with? I would assume anything.
Pretty much any kind. Yeah. Open, closed systems. Whatever. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Well, good questions. Shawn, why don't you come on back in now? Dirk, thanks very much. And Shawn has an iPad at his end, and we found it when he shared his PowerPoint. You saw me for some reason, and nobody wants to see, but we couldn't see you. So we're gonna change it up, and I'm gonna share his PowerPoint right here, and then I'm gonna hide and mute myself again. And then Shawn, as I said, when you want me to change slides, just say, Chris, mash the button there, friend.
Go for it, Chris.
All right, take it away.
Okay, so we don't need to spend too much time on this, but I'm Shawn Cooney, and I'm the founder of the Cornstalk Farm and the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition. And my expertise is in data management, compression, and all those kinds of things. And that's why I'm the chair of the ASTM Sustainability Committee. So the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition is a bunch of folks, including Argus. Argus is one of our founding members, who are looking at making sure that sustainability becomes part of the talking points of products grown in the cannabis industry. And we're seeing overlap in what we're doing and what we're talking about in the CEA space, whether it's greenhouse or indoor growing. Next slide. And so why do we care and what do we do? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on, a lot of noise about, what we need to do for sustainability. There's the SEC is starting to talk about companies having to report their sustainability profiles and their ESG. So there's movement, and what do we do? And it's all about reporting. It's basically measuring and reporting. Everything Dirk has been talking about is going to become a requirement. So off to the next slide. And what we've done is, one of our projects at the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition is a Dartmouth College Thayer School of Engineering and a Rocky Mountain Institute research project over the past year. And just to sort of maybe put a point on a lot of what Dirk was saying, this wasn't about saving on water or fertigation, but it was a management issue, and it's a question of what you were measuring. We went into a space that was doing very little to no measurement, reporting, and analysis of the data that could be gleaned from their environment. They thought they were doing a great job, and they volunteered to be part of this study. And what we found was we could reduce their electrical use just for their heating and cooling by 56% per year. And so and what we're talking about is, almost $1 million in year one of energy use. And what was going on was, since they weren't measuring, and since they weren't analyzing, and since they weren't reporting what they were doing, they went and they changed lights. And they went from HPS to LEDs, thinking they're going to save money. Everyone tells them they're going to save money. But what happened was they changed the lights out, and all the other systems that weren't being monitored went crazy. Dirk was talking about one of his slides, I think it was slide 9 or 11, about smooth transitions. All their systems were doing was bouncing up and down, up and down, up and down, on, off, maximum heating, maximum cooling, maximum humidity, no humidity. And so they ended up using just as much energy after the transition. So we went in, metered everything, did a large analysis, and this is the kind of thing you can save when you pay attention to what's going on in your facility, measure and manage it. And the same kind of things will hold true through the rest of the systems in the facility. Next. But there's two things going on. We've got a grower perspective and a consumer perspective. And for the growers going forward, it's about automation, data-driven growing, predictable and consistent results, digitizing all your information and the cost. I mean, Dirk, went through this in detail, and I think it's what has to happen in the growing space. And but on the consumer side, it's about healthy products, convenience, flavor, the safety of the products they're buying, and the effectiveness if it's a medicinal kind of thing. But again, in order to understand that, you have to be able to take your data. You have to be able to analyze it, talk about it, and show to your consumer, what you did to that, how you grew it, and why it's better for them. So it's about buying decisions, and sustainability is completely tied to that. Next. And there's two things going on. Our growers are sitting here faced with the challenge of growing more sustainably and growing more product and growing for less money. But at the same time, the consumers are becoming more critical. And off to the next slide. You know, people are willing to adapt their purchase preferences. They're willing to go from what they're buying now to something that they see as more desirable. And you have to be able to talk to them about that and be able to prove what your, you know, that your strawberry is better, that your lettuce is better, that your cannabis is grown safely and doesn't have any heavy metals in it. But you have to measure and report in order to take advantage and to get people to adapt their preferences. And you want to be the brand of choice and the product of choice. But they're skeptical about sustainability claims. So again, you know, I'm going to keep harping on this, that, you know, you need to be well regarded, and to be well regarded, you have to communicate what you're doing to your customers, whether it's a wholesale distribution channel that can take your information and use it on their retail product, or whether you're doing direct to consumer. But you know, you have to have something to talk about to go forward. Next. So when do people want to know this kind of information? You know, and you know, whether it's through a distribution or wholesale channel, or whether it's directly, they want to know almost completely before they buy something, or during the purchase cycle. They don't want to know afterwards. You know, they want to either go to a store or go online and find out about it ahead of time, or while they're in the middle of it. And what happens though? It happens that that same percent for fresh foods, people are willing to pay more for fresh foods that gives them great buying information that is sustainable, that either sustainable or safety or efficacy. So there's a clear preference in the fresh food space and in packaged foods for products that have information that a customer can make a buying decision with. That's the next slide. And so I'm going to keep harping on my communication, educate, prioritize, and learn. That's what consumers do, and it's also what us in the growing side and in the production side need to know. We need to be able to communicate effectively, educate our customers, prioritize what we're doing in our investment, and look at that investment and how will that then impact a customer's buying decision. And again, repeat the process. You know, we got to measure, report, communicate, learn, go back and do it over again, so that we can have the best products and charge the most for them, or charge what it's worth to have that kind of a product. Next slide. And here's a sort of a sample of what you can do. This is just a sample I had put up using some sophisticated management software and measurement software, where if you collect data and you've got it collated and you know about what your company is doing and what the product you're going to sell is, you can throw a QR code on there, and that QR code can let a savvy consumer, a 30, 40, 50-year-old person scan that, and again, get the information, like I said before they purchase or during the process, whether they're in a store or online. So, you know, and a QR code is one way of doing it. It's by no means the only way you can communicate that kind of information, but it's a great way. You know, and what it does is it connects your customers, your employees, vendors, partners, investors to what you're doing as a business and to what your products are and, you know, what the value of those products are. So next. You know, and, you know, we're making huge progress in terms of sustainability in what the products can do, but we're not making very little progress in communicating about it. You know, it's not just about governments, it's not just about energy, it's not just about CO2. You know, there's great gains to be made, you know, across the board, you know, in any growing environment. You know, you can look at the inputs. There's a huge, as Dirk was saying, a huge amount of money can be saved by managing your fertigation correctly. Potentially 30% of not overusing nutrients, and you can. As part of our study that we did with Dartmouth, we found that by managing the data correctly and managing their water use correctly, we reduced their water use from a gallon per day per plant to about half a pint per day. Again, just by measuring and paying attention to what's going on. And there were concomitant savings in fertilization, but we weren't involved in measuring that, so I can't. But I can believe that what Dirk's number of 30% is kind of there. And one of the things that's happening is at this point, local facilities will be able to communicate what they're doing to their customers and be able to get that labeled branded product out into the consumer stream, the retail stream. Next, and I think that's kind of where I end up. Yep, that's just some info about me, and I don't need to blab about myself anymore. And hopefully we have some more questions.
All right, we've got a few, and I've got a few as well, and I'll pop Dirk or Shawn and Dirk's information up before we end here. Shawn,
Yep.
One of the risks of sort of tooting your own horn about how sustainable you are is being accused of greenwashing.
Yeah.
So how do you reliably quantify your sustainability claims and in a way that's sort of like believable to skeptics out there? What are some strategies? Measure,
Data. Dirk's control pitch. You have to have the correct measurements, measure the correct things, and report it. And a very simple way of doing it is, at least on the front end, is to say how much greenhouse gas per unit you're selling, per pound of lettuce, per gram of marijuana, and put a number on that. And there's lots of tools out there that you can use, whether it's a spreadsheet if you're really geeking out, or there are tools that are as simple. One of our partners, Sustain Life, has a tool that lets you basically do the TurboTax of greenhouse gas reporting. Ask a bunch of questions, you give it the answers, and then it will tell you what you're doing. Everything from your commuting miles to your electric bill.
And, Dirk, is that anything that Argus is now working into its the data end and reporting end of its control systems?
Yeah, we can basically measure almost anything you like. We quite often measure, installations quite often have gas meters, electrical meters, all that kind of stuff, which is all connected to our system almost by default, and we can use that in any kind of reporting. We can also export that data to other platforms.
I just wondered if you'd gone one step further to create like a sustainability report for customers, looking at specific things.
Yeah, so not specifically from an Argus perspective. Customers can ask, and we sometimes display energy use in the dial, and you can see it go up or go down as a user, if you like.
Yeah, I could see that be something that would maybe come, because a lot of growers, they don't know what should I be, okay, I'm measuring all this different stuff. I got all this data. How do I then put it in a format that I share with my big retailer or my end consumer that impresses them, that shows, oh, look, your carbon footprint is this, or those kind of terms.
Right, and the folks we work with have an open API that can read or can take information from Dirk and Argus's equipment, and until Argus comes up with their own front ends, APIs are really helpful.
So there are those. Just look for those third-party solutions. In other words, yeah. Shawn, another question. Maybe it's for both of you. I guess really is a lot of my audience is growing ornamentals. I can see the value of this for consumables, vegetables or cannabis, hemp, etc. But what about for a bedding plant producer, potted plants, poinsettias? Do they even need to bother with this stuff?
From one point of view, if a company like that is large, if it's a family-owned company and everybody pats each other on the back and they trust everyone to do the best thing for the company, probably not. But if there are investors involved, and you need to start being, you probably need to begin getting your ducks in a row to be able to talk to your investors about it, and what you're doing, and making sure everyone's happy and you're doing the right thing, because they're going to start asking. The SEC is going to start asking every publicly traded company.
Yeah. Well, in the case of a lot of my audience, Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's are going to be asking that question, and that's worse than the SEC.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we had. If anybody has any more, let me pop this up here. There are the email addresses of both our guest expert gentlemen today. I'll leave that up just for a second. I should mention it's 3:45 in the morning where
That's
Dirk
correct.
is right now. How many cups of coffee have you had so far?
I had 4 or 5. Yeah.
I thought you were speaking rather rapidly there. So we appreciate you getting up early tomorrow to make this happen.
You're welcome.
He's assured me that the rest of Thursday works out beautifully for everybody. The planet doesn't end, nothing bad happens. So that's the beautiful thing about talking to a man who lives in the future. Again, if you want to go back and hit any of the points, personally, I want to look at Dirk's with the third or fifth slide that had all those cost and percentage variables, that chart. I want to look at that one again. That looked interesting. You can go to the archive, growertalks.com/webinars. Within about half hour, 45 minutes of this webinar ending, it will be under the it's not called on demand. It's the place. Scroll down, you'll see it. It's a place where you can watch any of the previous webinars we've had. And that's pretty much it. I don't think I had. Let's see. Let's get to where'd my mouse go? There it is. I don't have any more questions here. So I want to thank both of you guys, and I want to say on behalf of Dirk and Shawn and all of my stellar staff at Ball Publishing who work hard so I don't have to. This is Chris Beatty saying so long, everybody. Thanks for attending. Zoom
Bye.
wave.
Yo.
Bye, bye. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dirk.